Thank you all once again for coming to tonight's program. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Director of Community Education at the McLean County Museum of History. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. We could not have programs like tonight's without support from the community, our members, and people like you. If you have enjoyed tonight's program and want to help the museum continue to host quality educational programs like this one, please consider becoming a member if you're not one already, or making a donation by following the link that I'm going to drop in the chat box. I'd also like to thank Illinois Humanities for helping support this program tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to go over today's format. We will be recording today's program so people who could not join us can watch it later. If you have a question for our speaker, please submit it in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the program. If you're having a technical issue, say with sound, please drop a comment in the chat box and I'll see if I can resolve the issue. And now I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Craig Bishop, who will present us a program on Billy Sunday, the Baseball Evangelist. Craig Bishop attended and received a BA in History from Kansas State University and an MA in Society and Eastern European Studies from the University of Kansas. He has been involved in the Pilot Outreach Jail Ministry for the last 27 years and has served churches in various ways depending on their needs. Bishop began to study the life of Billy Sunday in 1998, and after many years of research, completed his book in 2016, which you can see right here. And I will include information at the end of the program, how you can purchase your own copy. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce Craig Bishop.
Well, thanks, Candace. Thank you very much. And I really want to thank you, Candace, for the opportunity to be on this webinar and to give me the opportunity to share about Billy Sunday. I was interested in Billy Sunday when I saw this picture that you're seeing right in front of you in a Becca textbook. And I said, Billy Sunday, who's that? So I went to the University of Minnesota Library and I started reading about him, and the whole thing taken off. And all this stuff that I want to share, it's all about our history and an important person in our history's culture. And Bloomington was an important part of that. And so I want to talk about that tonight, of what he did when he was in Bloomington, Illinois. So I'm going to start out with this picture from 1917, but I'm going to go back to the beginning. And this picture was Billy Sunday was born in Ames, Iowa, south of Ames, Iowa. That was a log cabin that Billy Sunday was born in. That was his mother, Mary Jane Cora, and his half stepbrother there by that log cabin. And that's where the story began. And I started my book, when I titled my book, I called it The Story of a Remarkable Life, because I think you'll see as you read this about Billy Sunday, you realize he did have a remarkable life. A person who started and grew up in a place like this, and by the end of his life, the people he spoke to, he really did have a remarkable life. So he was born in 1862 in this log cabin, and thus his mother and his father. His father was William Sunday, and his mother was Mary Jane Corey. And this is the first tragedy in Billy's life. His father died in the Civil War. He was fording a river in Missouri, and he got pneumonia, and so he died before Billy was born. Billy grew up with no father. And in fact, his father is born in a cemetery in Missouri, and so he never knew his father, and he doesn't even know where his father was born. So this is his grandfather, Squire Corey, and Squire made everything on the farm because there was no man around. So Squire took care of everything. He was an excellent craftsman. He built everything on the farm: the house, the log cabin, blacksmith shop, the wagons, a turning lathe, bedposts, spindles for banisters. He made a loom for which Billy's grandmother wove fabric for his clothes. And Billy said they were ill-fitting affairs. They were warm, he said, but you couldn't tell by looking at my pants whether I was coming or going. So that was his comment about growing up. But the second tragedy in Billy's life was he had to get sent to an orphanage when he was 8 years old. And so he really grew up not only without a mother, without a father, both. And so when he was 8 years old, is because his mother was poor and she just couldn't provide for all their children, so she sent them to an orphanage in Glenwood. That was in Glenwood, Iowa. And so that's where Billy spent 2 or 3 years of his life, in this orphanage in Glenwood, Iowa. And then he got sent to this orphanage in Davenport, Iowa. And so this was a lot bigger orphanage. This had 150 to 200 kids, and the kids grew up in cottages. And in a situation like this, you learn to survive. You learn you've got to be tough. You learn you got to stand up for yourself. You learn you got to have courage. And that's what the orphanage looks like today. They use them for city offices. And so they've rebuilt them and obviously made them look nice. But that's kind of the condition of the kids that were growing up in those days. They didn't have very much. They had almost nothing. And that's how Billy Sunday grew up. But one thing they did have in that orphanage, they had strict rules. They learned how to work. They learned how to read the Bible. They learned how to go to church. And the disciplinarian of this man was S.W. Pierce, who was a tough disciplinarian. And if you messed up, he took the belt to you. And he had a lot of tough punishments, but Billy learned to work, and he learned to work in a laundromat, and he learned to do tasks. And so he learned discipline in his life, which was really important for him later in life, as you're probably going to meet if I'm going to tell you here in a little bit. That's a picture of the kids when they went to the orphanage in Davenport. Now this is Rock Island National Cemetery. This is right off of Davenport, and the kids used to take a steamboat up to this cemetery. And this cemetery was important because a lot of Civil War soldiers had died, and they were buried in this cemetery. And this is a very, very moving thing, because for a lot of children, because they had lost their fathers, and that's why they were in the orphanages, because they had lost a lot of their fathers. And so to go to that cemetery, and it was called, it wasn't called Memorial Day at that time. But anyway, they would put flowers on the graves as a way to remember the people that had died in the war. This is the stone that was right at the front of the cemetery, and it said, "Let us cross the river and rest in the shade of the trees." And this is by General Stonewall Jackson. And you saw this stone. I saw this stone when I walked into the cemetery. So Billy came back to Ames. He was 16 years old. He left Davenport. He got in an argument with his grandfather. And so he got on a horse and he rode to Nevada, which is about 10 miles away. And he stayed with John and Mary Scott. And John Scott, he was the lieutenant governor of the state of Iowa. And he had been a general in the Civil War. And they taught him discipline. They taught him about reading. They sent him to school. So he went to the Nevada High School. That's the house that Billy Sunday grew up in. It burned down a couple of years ago, but that was the house that Billy Sunday grew up in, probably in the 1870s. But the great break in Billy Sunday's life was the fact that he was a tremendous athlete. He could outrun all the kids in his class. And when he went to Marshalltown, after he was in Nevada, he started playing baseball. And he started realizing he was the fastest guy on the team. He could catch all these fly balls, and he could steal bases. Like, amazingly, he could steal bases. And so Billy Sunday was recruited by Cap Anson. Now, this is Cap Anson. He was kind of the Derek Jeter of the Major League Baseball in the 1880s. And he had an aunt named Emma who lived in Marshalltown. And she said, "Oh, Cap, you got to see Billy Sunday. He's the fastest guy we have in town, and he can outrun anybody." So Cap, he was the major league star of that era. He came down to Marshalltown to scout this guy named Billy Sunday. And he was pretty impressed with Billy Sunday. And you got to realize the Chicago White Stockings, that's who Cap Anson played for. They were the champion of the major leagues, kind of like the New York Yankees or the Houston Astros of that day. So he came down and saw Billy Sunday. That's when Billy Sunday was about 20 years old. And he came down and saw Billy Sunday, and he said he invited him up to Chicago to do a tryout. And so Billy Sunday came up to Chicago, and with a tryout, he had $1 in his pocket and a green silk suit that it cost him about $6. And he shows up there with all these professional baseball players. And here's this country kid from Ames, Iowa, showing up in the huge city of Chicago. And Cap said, "Well, let's see how fast you really are, Billy, because I've heard how fast you are." So I want you to take Fred Pfeffer on. He's one of the fastest guys in the major leagues. I want you to take him out and see how fast you are. And so Billy said, well, if I race him, it's okay if I take my shoes off because I like to run barefooted. And so everybody kind of laughed and said, well, sure, Billy, go ahead if you want to. So he took his shoes off and he raced Fred Pfeffer, and he was one of the fastest guys in the major league, and he beat him by about 10 feet. So Billy got signed with the world champion Chicago White Stockings as a 20-year-old kid, and he started traveling all over the United States with the White Stockings as a baseball player. And that's Billy Sunday in the bottom in the lower right-hand corner, the only one without a mustache. That's Billy Sunday with the Chicago White Stockings there. And there's some baseball cards. They did baseball cards back in those days, but they sold them in cigarette packages. So that's how they sold baseball cards, with cigarette packages. But there's Billy Sunday as a baseball player in some baseball cards. And there's a couple of baseball cards of some other famous. This guy on the right, John Clarkson, if you know anything about baseball, if you study very much, he won 53 games in a single year, which is amazing. And another guy to the left, he was the home run hitter of that era. He had 27 home runs, which is a lot of home runs. And his home run record lasted for 27 years, and it was eventually beat by Babe Ruth, the famous Babe Ruth. And there's Cap Anson, Billy Sunday, later in life. They used to do some golfing together. But anyway, they decided, how fast is Billy Sunday anyway? I mean, he's so fast, he can outrun anybody in the major leagues. And so they did an exhibition after one of their ball games, and they found one of the fastest guys in America, and it was H.M. Johnson was his name. And they said, well, let's just run Billy Sunday and H.M. Johnson. Let's just see who the fastest person in America was. So they did this exhibition after one of their games, and Billy Sunday lost by less than a foot to H.M. Johnson, one of the fastest men in the major leagues. So he was a very popular player, clean cut, was a great. He wasn't the best hitter in the world, but he was a great base stealer, and he was a great person. People really liked Billy Sunday. But every once in a while, something major happens in a person's life. And when Billy Sunday was out getting tanked up, as they said back in those days, having some beers with some of his friends, and he was outside in State Street in Chicago, and a group of musicians came by, and they started singing some gospel hymns that Billy sang, his mother sang to him when he was a young boy. And really Sunday started thinking about his life, and he said, you know what? I think that I'm not happy with my life the way it is. And so he followed the Pacific Guard Mission Group back to Chicago, or back to the mission, and he decided to give his life for Christ. He said he went back there, and that's what he decided to do. And his life totally changed, and the life of millions of people changed because of that decision he made that night, or a couple nights later. And there's Billy Sunday at 22 years old. He was born in 1862, so that would have been about 1884. And so instead of Billy pursuing his baseball career, he decided to join the YMCA. He gave up his baseball career. He was making quite a bit of money back in those days. I think he made about $3,000 or $4,000 a year, which was a huge amount of money. But he decided to give it up and to go into ministry, full-time ministry. And so he joined the YMCA. They hired him, and he ended up getting paid like $83 a year. And he had one or two children at that time. But he just felt the call of God on his life that he wanted to serve the Lord and serving in the YMCA. So he went around to different places, saloons or anything else, and invited people to come to their meetings. Okay, now this is the other thing. One of the major things that happened in his life was a lady came into his life, and her name was Helen Thompson. And they were married their entire life. I think they were married for 47 years. Until he died in 1935. But Helen Thompson is going to give the story of how they met. And so listen to this. It's a really funny story.
The young man I met was Billy Sunday. I wasn't particularly interested. I had a steady young man that I'd been going with a year or so. He was 18 also. We were both 18. And we talked about our future, you know how you do sometimes foolishly. And so I wasn't wasn't a bit interested particularly in meeting a new young man coming into our church, although I was fair to him and bowed and said how to do, and that is all. Then later, my best girlfriend, Libby Stewart, who had no steady company, met Billy Sunday, and oh, she thought he was wonderful. She came to me and she said, "Oh, you don't know how wonderful that boy is. He is just supreme. He's grand, and you ought to get a better acquainted with him now." And I thought, well, that would be a nice, kind act to do, to get acquainted with him, and at the same time, make it possible for Libby to go with Billy Sunday. So I tried to shove him off to Libby. I was just a kind Samaritan trying to get the other two people settled together. So for weeks and weeks, I invited Billy Sunday and Libby Stewart and Archie, my regular beau, to our house for Sunday evening snack, supper, just before we went over to Christian Endeavor, 6:30 every Sunday night. And that went on for 2 months or so.
And then the moment finally came when Billy bolstered his courage to approach Nell directly. It was at the conclusion of one of their Sunday night get-togethers.
I was there, and Billy Sunday was there. And I wasn't paying any attention to Billy Sunday especially. I was ready to dash out of the chapel and across the street and home. And but just before I was ready to run, a voice interrupted me, and I heard somebody say, "May I see you home tonight, Miss Thompson?" And I looked around my left shoulder, over my left shoulder, and there was Billy Sunday standing. And I laughed, and I said, "Sure, if you want to." And the reason I laughed was because I only lived 60 feet away from the church, just across the street from the church, and I knew he knew where I lived.
All right, guys. Okay, anyway, let's keep going here.
The young man
Okay, this is the first meeting he held in 1896, and this was in Garner, Iowa, which is in north central Iowa. And Miss Sunday's giving a testimony about what happened that first meeting in 1896.
Be in the hard, dark spot for 6 days, and then a telegram came to Chicago saying this: the Baptist man and the Methodist man and myself, Presbyterian, have united, and we are going to hold a revival. We'd like to know if you would be the evangelist that will come and lead us in it. We have already rented the Opera House in a little town in Iowa named Garner, and let us know at once, please. So, of course, would he go? It was just like manna coming down from heaven to a starving man to get this telegram, because we were in the depths of darkness of not knowing where to go after Dr. Chapman had gone back into the pastorate and left the evangelistic field suddenly. So he went there, and then the Lord blessed in such a manner that there was no doubt about it was God's plan for Billy to be there, because 268 people found the Lord in the 8 days of the first 8 days that Billy ever preached. And the ministers were wild. They said, "Oh, this is too good to stop. We just can't stop next Sunday. We just got to go on. This is, we just don't dare stop. This is too good." And they came to Billy and told him so. And he said, "Yes, we've got to stop. The reason is I haven't any more sermons to preach." So they had to let him go from the town of Garner to the next little town and the next little town. And from that town, Garner, there never was a time in 39 years when Billy didn't have a place to preach. Way ahead, sometimes 2, 3, 4 years ahead, sometimes had to wait for him to come.
Okay, so that's the first testimony in 1896.
Yeah.
There's Billy Sunday at 30. Now I'm going to give you a few testimonies of some of the early meetings he had. This is from 1897. This is from Elliott, Iowa. I'm going to read these to you really quickly about Elliott, Iowa. He's a great power for God, and his preaching is stirring the country for many miles around us. His congregations are sometimes greater than the population of the town. This shows something of what is being done. Wednesday morning, the northbound train carried 35 cases of liquor to Elliott, but the southbound train carried the stuff all back again. Sunday comes out strong against the liquor business, hits it hard, and hits it where it lives. from Emerson. This is the Opera House in Emerson, where over 100 were converted during the 3 weeks meeting. In its entire history, our little town has never witnessed such a transformation. Audience packed the Opera House to its utmost capacity every night to hear Mr. Sunday. Many a calloused and wicked heart has been changed, and many homes have been made happy. The evangelist's power in holding the close attention of his audience all the way through is wonderful, and his resources seem boundless. His vivid imagination, irresistible humor, and untiring earnestness make him an unusually interesting and most effective preacher. This is from Bedford, Iowa, this is 1900. He came to Bedford. Never has Bedford witnessed such a religious awakening as it is now in progress at the Presbyterian Church. The Church of God is being shaken to its very foundation, and many are actually saying, "What must I do to be saved?" For nearly a week, Evangelist Sunday has been holding audiences spellbound by his earnest preaching of Christ and him crucified. He has a forceful manner all his own that commands attention and holds it to the end. He makes no compromise with the world, the flesh, or the devil, and plenty of hot shot into the sinks of the sinners. And he strikes at everything that bears the stamp of sin with fearlessness and impartiality. Last night, ushers brought chairs and filled the aisles. People poured in long before the hour of service. Later, never in the religious history of this community are there meetings of those of yesterday. People poured out to the morning meeting and filled the church. In the afternoon, the place was packed with men, making it the largest audience ever assembled in the county. Sunday poured hot shot into the sins of the day. As he warmed up, off came his collar, then his coat, and for an hour and a quarter, he dealt sledgehammer blows for righteousness. Several times the men burst out in applause that shook the church. And then the next one. There was an overflow meeting to bid Mr. Sunday goodbye and his farewell, Godspeed. More than 200 people were out there to say a last goodbye, and while waiting for the train, all joined heartily in singing some of the gospel hymns that become so precious to those who attended the services. The spectacle was indeed an inspiring one as they cheered those consecrated people on their way to other fields of labor. As the train left the station, handkerchiefs and hats were waved, the little group standing on the rear platform until it was lost in sight. We believe the good resulting from these meetings will never be known this side of eternity. Okay, that's an example in 1903. At that time, they just had tents. They didn't have tabernacles, which I'll describe to you in a little bit. But that showed the crowds that would crowd into the tents that he had back in those days. Then they started building tabernacles. This one was built in 1909, but you can see that they didn't have buildings big enough to hold the crowds. So what they would do is the citizens of the town would get together and they would build these wooden tabernacles. And then when they were all done with it, they would sell the wood to pay for their services of the meeting. If you look at this picture up in the upper left-hand corner, if you can see it on the top beam, it says Sunday, Citizens Erecting Sunday Tabernacle. And you can see the two guys up on the corner is up there putting the tabernacle together. This is a meeting we had in Keokuk, Iowa in 1904. Now we get to Bloomington in 1908. And this is the meetings that he had in Bloomington in 1908. And on this particular one, here, let me go on here. This is a particular one, people climbed onto the tabernacle roof of the tabernacle. You can see a couple pictures of him down on the right and left. The top right picture is the choir that sang for the Bloomington event. And the bottom is Mr. Sunday. But that's the tabernacle itself. The meetings lasted from December 27th, 1908 to February 3rd, 1908. That's what the tabernacle looked like. So somehow that guy got on top of that tabernacle and was looking through those windows to see what was, and by the way, it was December or January, and he still got up on top of that roof, quite in the middle of the winter. And here's some pictures of that Candace was kind enough to send me from the Pentagraph. That's the interior of the tabernacle at Bloomington. You can see what that looked like. And the choir sat in the back. They did the singing in the back of the choir. And this is some of the meetings in Bloomington. You can see the crowds that they would come in there. I put at the top, I wrote in what's at the bottom of the card. And so you can read Billy Sunday preaching to a Sunday morning audience, 6,000 listeners. This one, Mr. Butler singing at the meeting where Billy Sunday talked to women on the local option, March 30th, 1908, 6,500 women in this particular meeting. This was a men's meeting on March 1st, 7,000 men listening to Billy Sundays. He had a sermon, it was called Hot Cakes on the Griddle. And you can see the enormous crowds that came into those meetings. It's incredible. Billy Sunday drives the water wagon, and you know, get on the water wagon was meaning you were going to get away from booze. And Billy preached a lot against liquor and against booze. Part of that reason is his mother married a couple times after William, her first husband, died, and her two husbands were alcoholics. And Billy saw a lot of alcoholism when he was in Chicago working for the YMCA. And so he preached strongly against booze. And that was a common theme back in those days, the prohibition, and we can talk a little bit about that later. Prohibition and elimination of liquor, that type of thing. There's another Ben's meeting on January 30th, 1908. You can see the huge crowds there to come into. Anyway, so the revival meetings got over with, and you can't read this very well, but the total attendance at all the meetings in Bloomington, including the choir meetings, children meetings, were 414,000. 414,000 people came to these meetings in Bloomington. And the total attendance of the Tabernacle was 378,000. And Mr. Sunday spoke 102 times. You can imagine speaking that many times. He'd speak twice a day a lot of times, sometimes 3 times a day. This is a tabernacle they did in Wheeling, West Virginia, and they built this thing in 4 days. And you can see they did it in the wintertime. Well, they constructed this thing. They built the whole thing in 4 days. Now, this is a funny story. This was in Springfield, Illinois in 1909. And I found this I'd heard this story about Billy Sunday got horsewhipped by somebody. And so I got the Springfield News in 1909, and I looked back in the microfilm, and I just scrolled back, and sure enough, there it is. Fanatic horsewhip Sunday at open meeting of revival. And apparently this guy was on the front row. He'd been following Billy Sunday around. His name was Sherman Potts. And when Billy got up to start to preach, he pulled a horsewhip underneath his coat and started whipping Billy Sunday around the legs. And so Billy Sunday jumped off the platform on top of the guy, and the ministers behind Billy got on top of the guy, and everybody was beating this poor guy up, and the women were fanning themselves, and they said, "We're never coming back again." And the whole thing caused a huge disturbance. But anyway, it was really quite funny. But you can see Billy Sunday in this picture. He's kind of on crutches there because of the attack he got. And this guy, Fred Siebert, he got real upset. They hauled him in the back of the tabernacle, this Sherman Potts, and the police were going to take him to jail. And then Siebert had to get in on it. And so he threw a couple punches at the guy. And so they had to break these two guys up in the back of the tabernacle. And then, so finally they got the guy to the police station, and then they decided to send him to an insane asylum. So Sherman Potts, to go to Kankakee Asylum, does not want to go back to the institution where he served before, and his wish is respected. So besides all that, there were great meetings, and hundreds of people came in, just like Bloomington. Now, any person you like, if you know, like if you're a historical director, there's a team element involved in anything you do. Nobody can do it by yourself. And Mr. Sunday couldn't do it by himself. You need somebody to play the piano. You need somebody to direct the choir. You need Bible teachers. So all these people played an important part in the Billy Sunday team. Virginia Asher. And by the way, the team wasn't just involved with the tabernacle itself. They went out into the community and recruited people to come to the meetings. They would go into businesses. They would go into factories. So this is a whole citywide effort to draw people into the tabernacle meetings. His greatest helper was his wife, Mrs. Sunday, and they called her Ma Sunday, and she was his greatest helper. She became his campaign manager in 1911 because the meetings were getting so huge. there was no way that Billy Sunday could do all this by himself, and he needed his wife to be by his side. And so she took over the responsibilities of being a campaign manager, as well as protecting him, because the publicity was unbelievable. I mean, all the newspapers would want to talk to him, and so she needed to protect him a little bit to rest. So when he was in these campaigns, they lasted 8, 9, 10 weeks long, speaking to that many people. So, and the other person who really changed the Billy Sunday was Homer Rodeheaver. You maybe never have heard of him, but he was known for his famous trombone, and he led the choirs of the Billy Sunday choirs. And he did a wonderful job of incorporating hymns for the choirs and also in the audience. And sometimes if you wanted to do Bright in the Corner Where You Are, Homer would turn around and he would lead the audience in Bright in the Corner Where You Are. He would do the left-hand side would take a verse, and the right-hand side would take a verse, and then the middle one, and then the back. So everybody got involved in a tabernacle meeting. It was beautiful to hear all the voices come together and harmonize like that. And he was one of the first ones who did records. He literally had records produced with Virginia Asher, and they sold these records, and they sold them all over the United States. Things like In the Garden and Right in the Corner Where You Are, and songs like this. Right in the Corner Where You Are. That was probably the famous song of the Billy Sunday era. And this is a tabernacle that was built in Beaver Falls in 1912. And you can see it's a big citywide affair. Everybody wanted to be a part of this and wanted a picture taken. Now, this is a funny story, actually. This is from the Billy Sunday snowstorm in 1914. And this was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And Billy Sunday started a campaign in 1914 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And they had everything all planned out. They had the tabernacle was built. It could hold about 10,000 people. They had enough for the choir. Everybody was excited because Billy Sunday was coming to town. But the one thing they didn't plan for was the weather. And so what happened is a huge snowstorm blew in. And I'll show you some pictures of it here. And Billy Sunday stirs 25,000 at opening day of a revival, 5,000 brave Sunday night storm. And so by the time the meeting started, a huge snowstorm with like 14 inches of snow had buried the whole tabernacle and the whole town of Scranton. And so they could hear the winds blowing outside. Occasionally, Billy Sunday would say things like, a real rip snorter, he called it. And then he would say things like, God, get out there and grab that blizzard by the snout. But anyway, by the time it was all over, there was 4,000 people that were left in the tabernacle overnight. And so they managed to get sleds and things to bring food and sandwiches and coffee. And they ended up boiling coffee on the collection plates. So they spent all night in this tabernacle. And you can see some pictures of them here. But anyway, it's so interesting. Generations, at least 2 generations, everybody knew where they were when the snowstorm hit Scranton Tabernacle, the Billy Sunday Tabernacle. And sometimes people would even say, if there was a huge blizzard, they would say, oh, it's going to be a real Billy Sunday out there. So anyway, it's kind of one of those stories, funny stories. And here's a picture of it. The tabernacle's getting bigger here around 1915. This is Syracuse, New York. This one could hold between 10 and 12,000 people. This is kind of a little bit of a picture here of kind of how Billy Sunday preached. He was very dynamic. He would point. He would roll up his sleeves, take off his coat sometimes, and then to get the community or the town involved, they would do a parade sometimes, because they want the people in the community to get involved. And so they would have a parade of, this particular one was like 10,000 people, and to invite people to come to the tabernacle, because this was a citywide affair. Like I said, it wasn't just for the people involved with it. It was for everybody. Okay, now this is another funny meeting here. This is really something. This is the Columbus, Ohio meeting in 1912. And so I'm going to let Mrs. Sunday tell the story of what happened, about how the women broke down the doors to get into the tabernacle.
We'd ever held a meeting in up to that time. It was in 1912. I remember that. It was before the Pittsburgh meeting. Of course, Pittsburgh was larger than Columbus. Columbus was about 250 or 75,000 at that time. And oh, that was a big meeting. capital city. And one thing I can tell you about that city, there were more saloon keepers and bartenders saved in Columbus, Ohio, than any other city we ever knew anything about. I remember one saloon keeper telling me that he was so mad when he saw the papers come in with Billy Sunday all over the front page and every place, that he just kick it under the bar and get it out of his sight. He was just disgusted with it. Anyway, the day that Billy Sunday assigned to preach to women only at 2 o'clock, we were telephoned to at 10 in the morning from Peterson, Albert Peterson, and he was all excited on the telephone. He said, tell Mr. Sunday that the building is filled now, 10 o'clock in the morning for this 2 o'clock meeting, and I don't know what to do with them. He said they're all in here, and they just got every seat taken, and it's full. So I told Billy about it, and he said, well, what are we waiting for? Tell Rudy to hurry up and get ready. Let's go right now. No use keeping them. If the place is filled, well, it can't be filled anymore. We'll just go and have the meeting now. So he did, and let them out at 11:30 or so. So about 1 o'clock, the place was jammed full again on the second time, but still they began to come just as though the meeting was starting. And they kept coming and coming and coming and coming until the outside was just surrounded. And some of the older women went to the doors and just pounded on the doors to get open. I took in the situation and saw how bad it was. And so I crawled out a window and got out on a piano box. I don't know how I ever made it, but I stood up on this top of this piano box and I yelled, "Women!" as loud as I could, and they stopped for a moment to listen at the voice, and I said, "Be sensible. You can't get in. You're keeping Mr. Sunday from preaching to those that are already in there, and I'll tell you what I'll do. Be good sports and do what I ask you to." I said, "Let's go over to the Columbus Memorial Building, 2 or 3 blocks from the Tabernacles." And I said, "I will attempt to tell you everything that Billy Sunday is telling these women inside for his women-only meeting." And I said, "Come on, be good sports." So some of them said, called out, "All right, Ma, we'll come." So I got out down off the piano box and got over there, and about 3,500 people filled that memorial building. And then I went on to tell them all I could remember for half an hour or 3/4 of an hour. And they were happy and well pleased and laughing when they went away. And it's the only time I ever did anything like that.
Well, I would think so. Okay. What she didn't say was, and this is the tabernacle on the picture on the left. On the back end of the tabernacle, there's an alley back there, and the women wanted to get in the meeting so bad they kicked down the door, or the alley door, and busted down the door and just started pouring into the back of the tabernacle. And the poor policemen were standing in the aisle, and when they tried to stop them, the women poked them with their hat pins. And so the policemen called back to the station and said, "We can't do anything with these women." So they just left. So anyway, it was quite a story. And I'll tell you this, at the end of the meeting, they had 2 meetings that afternoon, in the morning and the afternoon. When Mrs. Sunday came back to the hotel, she said, "When I got back to the hotel, Billy was changing his clothes. He was dripping wet with perspiration. He jumped in an automobile and spoke to 2,000 students assembled at Ohio State University. And then he came back to the tabernacle and spoke to another 12,000 women that night. And all told, that day he spoke to 40,000 women in one day." So just quite an amazing day. Now this is another interesting story. This is about Red Emma, and she was the classic Marxist of that era. Anti-capitalist, and she hated Billy Sunday, and she hated capitalism. She was a Marxist. She believed in what they were trying to do in the Soviet Union at that time, the Bolshevik Revolution. And so it just so happened that Billy Sunday and Red Emma were going to be in the same town, and so she came to one of Billy Sunday's meetings. And so they had a meeting that night where they all get together and mock Billy Sunday in this Patterson Hall. And they all left the building. And that very night, after they had mocked Billy Sunday and mocked God and mocked the meetings, the whole building burned down. And they wrote about it the next day. Big fire follows anarchist impiety. The whole Peterson Hall was destroyed by a fire. And what was interesting, Mrs. Sunday said the fire did not destroy any of the buildings outside except Patterson Hall. That was the only building that burned. I mean, typically when a fire, it'll spread all over the whole town, but that was the only building that burned. Everything else was not touched. This was the Billy Sunday Tabernacle in 1915. I just wanted to mention this real quick. In this particular meetings, Billy Sunday spoke to 2,500,000 people. He spoke for 11 weeks, and people were so sorry to see him go. They took everything they could out of souvenirs. They took the bunting, they took the buntings off the walls. They took sawdust from the floor and stuffed it in their pockets for souvenirs. They took the collection plates. They took the flowers off the altars. They cleaned the whole place out because he had spoken so much and he had touched their hearts so much that they really wanted to collect anything they could as a souvenir. That special time. And this is Detroit in 1916. And you can see some of the meetings there that they had. This was the Pentecost meeting they had. And this meeting, people got so excited. They jumped on their feet when Billy gave a parting remarks. They got so excited that people passed out from hyperventilation. They had to carry them to the hospital in stretchers, and people were completely beside themselves. The reporter was there and said it sounded like an earthquake had hit the place. People were screaming and yelling so much because he said he was gonna, if they voted for prohibition on Tuesday, that he'd come back and do a ratification parade down Woodward Avenue, and the people went totally bonkers. Okay, this is his probably climax of his career. Was in New York in 1917, and you can see some of the crowds. This tabernacle held about 17,000 people, and I'll play this clip for you.
Papers got their heads together about, we had 24 seats built, desks and chairs for 24 writers for the different newspapers and different columnists and magazine writers to come and sit in their own individual seat all the way through the meeting. So they got the idea. They said, well, now we're going to keep track of this ourselves. We're not going to take anybody else's count for how many people come forward. And we're going to select our best man that we feel that will be there every single night for the 10 weeks and the afternoons as well, and keep track of the number of people that come in response to Mr. Sunday's invitation to be saved. The result of this man's count for all the time, the 10 weeks of Mr. Sunday's invitations in New York City, amounted to 98,489 people. And the heading said we hoped it would be 100,000, but it was only 98,489 people. Maybe you didn't know that Billy shook hands with every single person that ever came to give their heart to the Lord and gave him a pat on the shoulder and a smile. It was a wonderful thing. Papers got.
Okay, I've got something here I want to play for you. And this is the Billy Sunday Tabernacle Choir. And somehow they were able to bring a recording machine into the Billy Sunday Tabernacle, and they were able to record this choir sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. And so we're going to play this just for a little bit here.
Hello, folks. Someone makes a sign, and it's sung by the Billy New York City in June of 1917. And just keep going. Just tighten the needle again and do it. There we go.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. I talk a little bit about Billy Sunday's home life, his wife and his children. That's a picture of Billy Sunday at home. It's a little bit of an older picture. The one to the right is Brent Grosvenor. He did a famous musical, not famous, but a very awesome musical called Sunday in Manhattan. And that's the steps of the Billy Sunday home. That's kind of what the inside of the home looks like. If you ever want to do a tour of the home, they offer tours. It's in Winona Lake, Indiana. But I talk a little bit about his children. There's a lot of tragedy here that I want to talk to you about. And so the kids are, I'll just name them to the left or the right. Helen Sunday, Helen Sunday Jr. She's the lady, she was the oldest child. And then right to her left is Billy Sunday Jr. And then the oldest son is George with the mustache. And then down with the bow tie, the black bow tie, that's Paul. Okay, and then you see him to the right, the picture to the right. Then again, you can see Paul going up the steps. Paul, Billy Jr., Helen, George. Okay, so that's the kids, and I'll talk to you a little bit about their children. Well, there's a picture of them there. Billy Sunday and Mrs. Sunday had a wonderful marriage together. They were great companions and friends and teammates in the whole work of evangelism and the whole work of the ministry. And there's the Ingle Nook. That is Billy Jr. sitting on Helen's lap. That is Paul to the right of Billy there in the back easy chair. Now a little bit about Helen. Helen went to Michigan, married her high school sweetheart, but Helen had an issue or sometime with her coordination of her limbs and her arms, and it caused her problems. It started when she was, I think, in her 20s. And they couldn't really diagnose it. They think today it might be muscular dystrophy, but at that time they couldn't diagnose it what it was. And so tragically, in 1931, Mrs. Sunday and Billy got a telephone call that Helen had died in the middle of the night, their oldest daughter, and it was a terrible tragedy for them. And I think they think it might have been a reason why Billy died at an early age, because it was terribly traumatic to have to go to his oldest daughter's funeral. And then we have George and Billy, and the boys never really followed their father's footsteps. Billy tried to take them to campaigns when they were young and get them involved in ministry, or he had a ranch out in Hood River, Oregon. And so he would take them up there to try and to get away in the summer times. But George and Billy's Jr. Always went their own way, never wanted to follow in his dad's instructions. He loved his kids a lot, but George actually died tragically. He committed suicide. He jumped out of a 5th-story building in San Francisco. And then Billy Jr. died in 1938. He drove his car into a telephone pole after a party. And then Paul's a little bit of a mystery child, but he joined in World War II. He was a co-pilot on one of these bombers, Ventura bombers, and his plane crashed in Palm Beach, Palmyra, California, on the side of a hill. So Paul died of a young age also, and so Mrs. Sunday outlived all her children, but she storied on. Mr. Sunday died in 1935. He continued his ministry up to the day he died, but he never had the same tabernacle meetings. They slowed down a lot in the 1920s, and so but he continued on with the ministry and this right is a sympathy note from a sympathy telegram from Franklin Roosevelt to Mrs. Roosevelt from Franklin Roosevelt to Mrs. Sunday when Billy Sunday died. This is an interesting story here. Babe Ruth hit one of the longest home runs in history. It was a 587-foot home run, and Billy Sunday was in the stands during that. And he got the game ball because the ball he hit, Babe Ruth hit, was 587 feet. And it was just kind of interesting. Billy Sunday happened to be there, and he got the game ball. And they had a sign there in Tampa that memorizes that site. And Billy Sunday kind of clowned around with baseball players as he got older, and there's one with Babe Ruth. And then He wasn't particularly close to them because he had his own life, but occasionally he would come by and see old-time baseball players or current players in the major leagues. Homer Rodeheaver, for the rest of his life, he worked with songbooks, developing songbooks. He had a music seminars that he would do in Winona Lake. That's his home there, Rainbow Point. So for the rest of his life, he worked with this man, B.D. Ackley, who's seated in B.D. Ackley, wrote over 3,000 different gospel hymns. And so Homer Rodeheaver died in 1955. Billy Sunday died in 1935. Mrs. Sunday died in 1957. So they both lived long, long lives. If you ever want to visit Ames, Iowa, this is where Billy Sunday was born. There's a Corey family cemetery, a birthplace, a stone there. It's right south of Ames, Iowa on Highway 30. Mrs. Sunday, after Billy died, she did her own type of ministry. She traveled all over the United States, talked about her husband. She traveled 1,000,000 miles probably all over the country. And she was a well sought after speaker. And she had gifts from people like Terry Truman, and Mrs. Sunday got a gift from Mamie Eisenhower. What's the connection between Billy Sunday and Billy Graham? Well, there isn't a very interesting connection. In 1924, Billy Sunday had her series of revivals in Charlotte, North Carolina. And 12 years later, there was a Billy Sunday group that was formed out of that revival meetings. And 12 years later, that group was still going on. And they decided to invite an evangelist named Mordecai Ham to do a series of meetings in Charlotte. And that was the meeting, that particular one is where in 1936, where Billy Graham gave his heart to the Lord. So there's kind of a connection there between Billy Sunday and Billy Graham, but there's more of a connection, which I'll talk to you about briefly. That Billy Graham used to go to Winona Lake, Indiana in the early 1940s, and he was with a group called Youth for Christ. And he was there. He used to go there with Cliff Barrows. If you know Cliff Barrows, he was the song leader for 60-some years with Billy Graham, and they would Youth for Christ meetings, and Mrs. Sunday lived there. And so Cliff Barrows just called me on the phone once and described the fact that Billy Graham and Cliff Barrows were good friends with Mrs. Sunday. And she talked to them a lot about what had happened during their Billy Sunday meetings. In fact, as you can see on the right, Billy Graham usually invited either Mrs. Sunday or Homer Rodeheaver to speak at one of his early crusade meetings because they were very, very popular figures. And there's Cliff Barrows, and you can see Homer Rodeheaver. He was famous with his trombone, and Cliff Barrows was very familiar with Homer Rodeheaver. In fact, he played a trombone like Homer did, but he stopped playing it during the New York City meetings in 1957. So Cliff Barrows was good friends with Homer Rodeheaver. In fact, he was at his funeral in 1955 and gave the eulogy at his funeral, Homer Rodeheaver's funeral. So there's a lot of connections between Billy Graham and Cliff Barrows and Homer Rodeheaver and Mrs. Sunday. In fact, there's a prayer meeting they had in 1949, and you can see Billy Graham right in the center of the picture, and Cliff Barrows is to the right, or to the left of Billy Graham. And there was a prayer meeting in 1949, and Billy Graham was getting ready to travel out to Los Angeles, California. And I have a testimony of a guy who was a bellhop in the Westminster Hotel, and he walked by this room, and he said, "What is going on in that room there? What's happening there? Something's going on in that room." And he says, "They're praying for Billy Graham. He's getting ready to go out to Los Angeles, California in 1940, this next weekend." And those were the meetings that Billy Graham took off and became so famous. That's, and in fact, if you know anything about Billy Graham, you know the Hour of Decision program they used to do. Well, they used to do that in the Billy Sunday Tabernacle, which was right there in Winona Lake. And Billy Graham used to come and speak sometimes in the Billy Sunday Tabernacle. Now, what's the connection between Ronald Reagan and Billy Sunday? What could be the connection between Ronald Reagan and Billy Sunday? Well, there's an interesting connection. Billy Sunday came to Dixon, Illinois in 1905, and he did a series of meetings in Dixon, Illinois. And through those meetings, Billy Sunday decided to donate money to help build a YMCA building. And Billy Sunday used to do that a lot because of his past and his of the YMCA. And a lot of times when he would finish his meetings, he usually give money to the Pacific Garden Mission, or he'd give money to the YMCA. So he gave money to help build this YMCA. Well, that YMCA, that Dixon, Illinois, Ronald Reagan grew up in Dixon, Illinois, and he learned to swim in that building, in the YMCA building in Dixon, Illinois. And through those swimming lessons, Ronald Reagan saved 77 people in the Rock River. And so in some ways, Billy Sunday helped build a building that Ronald Reagan used to learn to swim, and that Ronald Reagan learned to save 77 people. So you just never know what you're going to do in life, what's going to happen, or what a small little thing or a big thing can affect somebody down in the future later in life. Okay, now we'll walk a little bit of Billy Sunday here.
Civilization and society rests on morals. Morals rest on religion. Religion rests on the Bible and faith in God and in Jesus Christ. The Bible doesn't condemn any man because of his wealth. The Bible says the man that don't provide for his family is worse than an infidel. According to our standard of gold and silver, Abraham was worth $1.5 billion. David was worth $3 billion. Solomon was worth $5 billion. Solomon could have hired Andrew Carnegie for a butler, J. Pierpont Morgan to cut his lawn, and Andrew Mellon for a chauffeur, and John D. to black his boots. America needs a tidal wave of the old-time religion. America needs to be taken down to God's bathhouse and the hose to turn on her. And the time isn't far distant when the wheels of God's judgment are going to go sweeping through this old God-hating world. And I want to take a pledge in this audience to join me in a pledge that you will never rest until this old God-hating, Christ-hating, whiskey-soaked, Sabbath-breaking, blaspheming, infidel, bootlegging old world is bound to the cross of Jesus Christ by the golden chains of love.
Okay, there you go. You can't say it any different. Nobody will repeat that. All right, I got something I want to play for you here. My last thing, and this is right in the corner where you are. Okay, well, that's all I have, Candace. I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I also want to thank everybody for listening. Appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Craig. That was a fantastic presentation. And we do have a couple questions in the chat, so I will read them for you.
Okay.
Was Billy Sunday a Baptist minister, or was he not affiliated with a specific denomination?
He was an ordained Presbyterian, ordained in the Presbyterian Church. And that came from the fact that his wife was a Presbyterian. He started going to the Presbyterian Church when he met his wife, Helen. And so he was naturally affiliated as a Presbyterian. So.
Excellent. And another question, referring to the water wagon picture that you showed, is that where the saying "on the water, on the wagon" originated?
That's where it came from. If you fall off the wagon, you've fallen into drunkenness. If you stay on the wagon, you're sober. So that's where that all came from. That whole phrase is all from that era of the. And you know, what's interesting is Illinois voted for prohibition. Can you believe that? They voted for prohibition, and so did Michigan. And so it became an amendment through states like Illinois and Michigan, things like that. And you wouldn't think of that today, but they did. So.
And I had a question. Where did you get all the audio recordings and the video recordings of Sunday and his wife?
there was a record that was done in the 1960s or 70s. Okay, let me go back a minute. Before Mrs. Sunday died, they did some voice recordings of her. This was probably in the early to mid 1950s, and they tape recorded those recordings and saved them, because obviously she only had a few more years to live. So they must have gone in her home and recorded some of her memories. And then those eventually got put on an old LP record. And then I found a copy of that record, and then I transposed those onto, digitalized them, and then I can use them in my presentation. So that's where they came from.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions? Please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will answer them in the last couple minutes. Well, I do want to thank everybody for attending, and I did drop in the chat box a copy of the link where you can purchase Craig's book on Billy Sunday, the Baseball Evangelist. Oh, one more question. Are the recordings in the Smithsonian that you're referred to?
Nope. They're actually really hard to find. I'd have to say that they have, that record is pretty rare, and I just happen to get it, luckily, you know, and so I share them whatever I can. But no, the Smithsonian won't. They've never used them. So I think it's an important part of our history. I think it's an important part of our history. I hope the Smithsonian would do that. So, well, they ever will, though.
Excellent. And then I can answer this question, but you might be able to as well. The Tabernacle in Bloomington was located at the corner of Main and Olive Streets, I believe, from remembering from when the Pantograph article I just had published this past weekend. And it took up an entire city block in Bloomington. I'll have to look up what the location is there today, but yeah, it was a huge temporary structure, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, and then they tore the whole thing down and they just used it to sell the wood in it. So there's no Tabernacle left today. They're all gone.
No, which would be really fascinating if there was one of those tabernacles left. I mean, what a historic site that would be. I guarantee it. That would be so cool.
Yep. By the way, I got to put a pitch in for Candace. You know, there's not very many historical directors who put these things together, and you guys got a real gem at Candace here, who was willing to do these types of, who was willing to do these things for you. So don't ever let her go.
I appreciate the shout out and the kind words very much so. Well, I don't see any more questions, but thank you once again, and thank all of you for joining us. I do hope that you will join us for our next virtual program, which is our upcoming Lunch and Learn, Thursday, March 11th at 12:10, where we'll be discussing Bloomington Normal Innovation Alliance, partnering with our digital future with Jamie Matthey, council member for City of Bloomington, and Kevin McCarthy, council member for the town of Normal. You can use the link in the chat box to sign up for that Zoom. Oh, and we did have one more question that popped in while I was doing that. How long did it take you to research your book?
I started researching it in 1998, and it took me 18 years to put the book together. I didn't finish it until 2016, and I'm still finding stuff, you know, but basically I was blessed that I found a lady who would put a book together for me, and I had it all in a Word document, and but it wasn't really, I would call, professional looking, and then she really helped me. She was a professional, and she really put it together for me. So it took me 18 years, and that's, you know, it takes a while.
Absolutely. Research is a lot of hard work and lots of fun.
It is lots of fun. I really enjoyed it. You know, looking at those microfilm, those newsreels in those old papers was fascinating to look back at those old stories. So
I feel that way when I do research all the time. Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Candace.
You're welcome, and thank all of you, and have a good evening. Stay warm and stay safe out of the snow wherever you are.
Amen. Okay, God bless you guys. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.